Okay, so
into my YouTube for a second and saw what I could see.
okay,
Okay.
it
It
okay. It
okay. It
the
the
system
system
was
was
coming
coming
through.
through.
The
The
system
system
was
was
working
working
fine.
fine. It was just
There
there
was
was
the
the
scene
scene
on
on
the stream
the
was
stream
faded
was
to
faded
black,
to black,
so they weren't
so they
hearing
weren't
anything.
hearing anything.
Gotcha. All right, now I'm seeing the notification. So I'm gonna go out and share that, and you can vamp for a few seconds.
All right, welcome to Critical
All right.
Dispatch Six,
Welcome to
everybody.
Critical Dispatch 6, everybody.
Your new favorite political
Your new favorite
podcast.
political podcast.
What are we going to be talking about
What are we
today?
going to be
Well, we're
talking
going to
about
be talking
today?
about
Well, we're
some
going to be talking about
Alabama
some Alabama
constitutions. The
constitutions.
state
The state
constitution
constitution has a few ballots. Has a few, yes, a few ballots. Has a few measures
on the board
on the board
that
that of which we would like to speak of.
so we
So we
shall be doing
shall be doing just that today. I'm going to crank that volume, and I'm going to hear us
through
through
the
the YouTube broadcast.
now the benefit
Now, the benefit of this broadcast. Shall be doing just that today. I'm going to crank that volume, and I'm going to hear us through the YouTube broadcast. Okay, there's a bit of a minor echo. Maybe if I kill this mic. The benefit of this through the YouTube broadcast. Just listening
Yeah, I'm
to
back,
myself.
yo.
Okay, there's a bit of a minor echo. Maybe if I kill this mic. There's a bit of a minor echo, but it's we can live with it. I think I cut it off through. I think I cut it off through OBS. If not, I can do.
Yeah, I think they'd rather. I think they'd rather hear us talk about what we came here to talk about than excuse away our crappy tech issues. You know what I'm saying?
hey man those issues
Hey
aren't
man,
crappy.
those issues aren't crappy.
I know. It's what you're here for.
I'm still learning, man.
I'm
I
still
mean,
learning,
the main
man.
problem,
Anyway.
the main problem, right, is we need to get your subscriber count up. So eventually, we can start making bank off of this, and then we can get better systems.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
It's really just a matter of.
as I get
It's
better
really
with
just
it.
a matter of as I get better with it.
Sure.
Like
It's a learning curve. All right. So
oh yeah.
anyway, cameras call in the middle of my live stream. Anyway, are there any comments or questions that you have for me about the Alabama Constitution as you understand it and the issues this year before we get into it?
Nothing I can think of. The only thing that I could think of is the fact that some people. The only thing I could think of was was a humorous quip saying, "Wait, we have a constitution too."
Yeah, I mean that's like basic, right? Now, because I mean, I'm guessing most people learned about the U.S. Constitution way back in at least like first or second grade before they did about the Alabama Constitution.
That's fair.
Unless they have real good memories of accompanying their parents to the polls. But yeah. No, and it's a point of comparison, right, between the two. So the thing is, right, so the state, right, in our state government, we were founded as a state in 1819. The country was founded in, say it with me now, kids, 1776. That's when the Declaration of Independence was signed, and then we had the Revolution, and then we had the framing of the Constitution to form kind of a stronger national bond. We were a much smaller country geographically and population wise, right? And then we started getting more territory and more states, right? In Alabama was one of them in 1819. We've had several different constitutions. So like state governments tend to be modeled after the way that the U.S. government works in many different ways. For instance, right, you notice how we have two houses in the legislature. That's really for no other reason, I think, than that we have two of them in the two of them in Congress, right? Because there's really not a huge difference, like I mentioned before, between the Alabama House and the Alabama Senate. It's just that the districts for the state Senate are bigger than the districts for the state House. That's the main difference, and that the Alabama Senate is smaller. And that's all addressed in the state constitution, right? That's what a constitution is for, is the fundamental bedrock rules for how the government should function. You can put things in a constitution, whether it's the national constitution or the state constitution or your territorial constitution if you're in like Puerto Rico, right? That restrict the rights of citizens. But mostly it's the purpose of a constitution is to set the framework for how the government is supposed to work and limit what the government can do. For instance, we have the Bill of Rights, right, named after what preceded it a while back, the English Bill of Rights. That was the first 10 amendments, right? So amendments are in a constitution are changes, right? So we had the initial constitution, which was these articles. Here's how Congress is going to work. Here's how the president's going to work. Here's how the Supreme Court's going to work. And then after that, they started just like bam, 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 10 amendments, right? And so there's, so the Alabama Constitution, basically the current constitution that we had, where we had the last big like convention to like say, okay, here's the important things about how our state government should work, right? It was really in 1901. If you look on the Wikipedia page or any encyclopedia for the Alabama Constitution, it's going to say the state constitution of 2022. But did we get a new constitution in 2022? Not really, kind of, but not really. All they really did was take out explicitly racist language and rearrange the Constitution. But basically, any criticisms, any like deeper substantive criticisms you can make of the Alabama Constitution, as far as it just being too damn long, right? It's like one of the, if not the longest constitution in the world, not just in the United States. Like it breaks world records, I think, right? Because again, right, that's a problem, not only because you should, you want like a school child, for instance, to just be able to read the your Constitution in one sitting, right? If they're at grade level, it's just bad because it shows how much nonsense that we've been able to get away with putting in the Constitution. For instance, right, you know what I said earlier about how the primary purpose of a Constitution is to limit what the government can do rather than private organizations or private citizens. Adam, what do you think? Do you think there are any amendments in the Alabama Constitution that limit the rights of citizens or of private organizations?
That's the fun part. I honestly have no idea because the thing's too damn long. The thing's exactly. I'm looking it up.
But the answer is yes. In those long lists of amendments, of books upon books of amendments, and in any constitution that's lasted this long, right, including the U.S. Constitution, you're going to have amendments and then amendments that walk back previous amendments, like with prohibition, and then they took away prohibition, for instance, right? But so that's always going to add to the length of a constitution that can be amended at all. But Alabama, yes, it has like multiple questionable amendments that limit not only the rights of the government, right, but also the rights of private organizations and private citizens. For instance, the prohibition on gambling is in the Constitution, right? The reason it's illegal for you to set up a casino, whether you think that's a good or a bad thing, it's not just because of a statute passed by the legislature. From my understanding, that's in the Alabama Constitution, along with the prohibition on the lottery, which in effect, right, is even worse because we can't just have, because everyone basically wants a lottery, but that puts extra hurdles in the way of changing the status of that, of like just having a lottery, right? But, also, right, you know how, do you know what so-called right to work laws mean, Adam?
I hear that was the right to work thing where a worker could be fired for any reason, or a worker had like a
Yes,
right to
that's
work?
that's a common misconception, and these are just like labels like pro-life, pro-choice, pro-business, what have you. All of these labels are whether they're accurate or not, right? They're just kind of like political labels that make them easier to market, right? So what you're talking about is fire at will, right? We're also an at-will state. I'm not a huge fan of that. That basically puts the burden on an employee to prove that their boss was being reasonable when they fired them, which makes it harder to prove things like discrimination or unreasonable requests and things like that, right? No, so-called right to work. Really, what it is it's laws in this country, in various states, right, that ban a company from making a contract with a union where they say, hey, if you come work for us, it's your understanding that by working here, you're protected by a union. And for that reason, right, we don't want you just freeloading. We want off of those protections, right? We want you to pay dues and probably like officially join the union. Now, what's the problem with that, right? Because some people might be like, well, that sounds good. Why should I have to pay union dues or join a union if I don't want to? The problem with that is like, think about it, right? You're restricting what private employees can do, right? Like if you're a big free market person, or like you think that the market is a good force in society, then it should give you pause in thinking about that this is a thing that limits what private companies can do, right? So if you're that hard pressed about the fact that you don't like unions and you don't like union dues, well, just find a different job, for one thing, right? Go find a job where you don't get those protections.
By the way, on your screen is an elaboration on right to work states and at will states that I found. I'm just scrolling through it while we talk about this.
How this relates to the Alabama Constitution, right, is that this isn't just a statute that they passed here. Well, I'm going to finish my spiel on the problem with right to work laws in general, but also when right-wing politicians, because it's usually like politicians who call themselves conservative or Republican these days who do this, especially in the South. It's very popular in the South. There are places, to be fair, in like the Northwest and the West, and out in the Western United States, like Alaska, where they're a little more pro-union, right? Even if they're Republican, and they're not necessarily going to push for this kind of stuff. But when right-wing politicians and business leaders and business PACs say, we want to protect your right to work, we want right to work laws, they don't actually care about your right not to pay union dues. They care about weakening the union movement in general and weakening unions and making it harder to organize a union that has a strong contract, right? So you should look at it from that perspective of this is about weakening unions in general, right? There are some unions that don't even have contracts, right? It's just that the strongest unions, both politically and in terms of what they can do in their workplaces, tend to be these unions that make these kinds of contracts and then try to make sure that everyone who gets protected is paying dues, right? But how this relates to the Alabama Constitution is that in the 1950s, right, and this this is also connected to racism because the union movement and you know always in this country and especially in the South, right? It always has to be biracial. In order to be strong, it always has to involve racial solidarity. Especially back then, it was especially like ethnic white people and working class white people alongside working class black people, working class black men. These days, it tends to be not only those demographics, right, but especially black people, white people, and Hispanic people and working class immigrants, right? So but this is, remember, you know, anyone who's historically literate knows that 1950s was had a lot of racial backlash. But at first, we had a period where like it was rah-rah unions, unionization in Birmingham, better conditions for the populism with Governor, Folsom. We're fighting for the rights of workers, and people were a little more like we still didn't have civil rights, right, for black folks, but it was a little more chill about race, right? Jim Folsom didn't run on racism. You didn't have Governor Wallace doing the stand in the schoolhouse door. But then the Brown v. Board of Education happened, and there was a backlash against racism. At the same time, business leaders could coalesce around this reactionary spirit, as one might say, to push back against unions, right? And they put in a right to work amendment in the Alabama Constitution. In that same era, right, to say you can't have everyone at a workplace collect union dues or join the unions, right? Basically just to weaken unions, because it threatens the powerful and it threatens right-wing politicians in the South who depend on racism and classism to build their coalitions and maintain power, right? And also during that era, they passed an amendment that said that you couldn't use gas taxes for public transportation. Now, fortunately, I don't think that, I think that is crappy, right? But I don't think that kills the possibility of having stronger public transportation. I think even for the time being, there are ways that we could get the Alabama Public Transportation Trust Fund, still unfunded, thank you very much, state legislature, funded by some like voluntary means, right? Like paying for a specialized car tag, for instance. But these are like, in my opinion, very crappy reactionary things that we were able to get into the Alabama Constitution. Now, any thoughts on any of that, Adam?
So generally, it's kind of on brand for America. So generally, this was for generally, this right to work implementation was for one of two things, for both of them, but mainly racism and to give rich white people more money. Am I following so far, like the general gist of it?
Exactly, because rich white men, whether they prioritize the racism or their own power more in their hearts, right, were smart enough to know that the two things went together. That you needed to divide working class, white people against working class people of color, and unions would be bad for their power and bad in some ways for their profits, right? Because if you have to start paying people more, and if you have to start spending money on things like benefits and protections, that might cut into your precious millions and these days billions of dollars of profits, right? But yeah, that's exactly what it's about in my mind.
Someone think of the billionaires. Won't someone please think of the billionaires?
Yeah, but like mainly, right, like the big gripe is this is stuff that should be debated if we're going to even debate it, right? It should be just be dealt with by our lawmakers. Now, what's the difference between passing a law and an amendment, right? Because like you can repeal a law, you can repeal an amendment by creating a new amendment, but it's a different process, and the process is, right. So in Alabama, right, it's the same thing as like U.S. Congress or most, three branches of government system you can think of, right, where the simple majority, usually, I guess, like there's filibuster and blah, blah, blah. We won't get into all that. But basically, like a majority of both houses just pass it and they send it to the governor, and the governor decides to veto or sign it, and then they go from there. With an amendment, the way it works is you get a 60% majority of both houses, and then it gets sent to the people to vote on at large. Now, the difference, now the U.S. Constitution, right, by way of comparison, as it stands right now, is, in my mind, much more superior than the Alabama Constitution, right? It's much shorter. It's less reactionary in language and intent. It is, by reactionary, I basically just mean right wing, right, and oppressive. But but part of that is because it's much harder to amend the U.S. Constitution than the Alabama Constitution. You know this, right, Adam? How do we amend the U.S. Constitution?
I know that. For a quick addition, for anyone that doesn't know, the closest number that I could find for Alabama state constitution amendments, there are currently, as of October 2018, there were 928 Alabama constitution amendments. For as long as I can remember, for up until about FDR's time onward, there have been 27 U.S. Constitution amendments.
Yeah, and another thing that I haven't even mentioned is, right, Alabama doesn't have a whole lot of what you call home rule, which means decentralization of power to counties and cities. What do I mean by that, right? Speak in English, Jacob. What I mean is what you might think is that you can just go to your city and say, hey, I have a thing that should be, or go to your county commission, right, to people who run your county, because we're all in counties as well in Alabama, whether we're in cities or not, right? You can just go to your city or your county and be like, hey, I have this idea. I think it should be a law, or I don't like the way you guys are doing this one thing, and then you can talk to the city council, and then they can pass it, and then the mayor can sign it, and it can become a law. In many cases, Alabama says no, you can't do a lot of things. There are certain things where you explicitly need to ask, where we're going to easily, right, depending on how much resistance there is to it in the legislature, pass a law saying that your city can't do what you want to do, or you actually have to ask permission from the state to do certain things, or even pass an amendment. So there's something called local amendments, right? Where people who, to my understanding, right, like this is definitely true. Like it's so confusing, right? This aspect of it is so confusing, right? But the local amendments, right? You might notice that sometimes you go to the polls and you're dealing with an amendment that has to do with some like university or some other county that you've never even been to. And you're like, why am I voting on this? I don't live anywhere near there. I've never been to that university, right? But what it is like certain things, because of how much power we give to the people in their states and counties, like we have to go through the whole amendment process where people from outside of our localities vote on it. After the legislature, which includes a bunch of people we don't know, who aren't from our local county or city, vote on it, right? And so that's another crappy reason that the Alabama Constitution ends up being so big. You feel me?
Yes. On your screen right now, by the way, is a page that I found for proposed constitutional amendments. I'll put the page for this in the description of this broadcast, but this is a helpful resource for you to see for yourself what's being proposed. Some things might not be in your county, and I think Jacob's about to elaborate why on that. But
I
just wanted to.
honestly, with the local amendments thing, I've told you about as much as I know. Even I find it confusing, right? Like I know sometimes you go to the polls and you vote on things that don't even affect your county, and sometimes the vote just goes to that county. I also know that under per the Alabama Constitution, right, a city council or county commission usually or can't always just like pass the law, right, pass a tax increase just by like going through a regular legislative process. That they also have to put it up to a vote of the people. And this is just my opinion. I don't think they should have to do that. I think if you need to, if you need to raise taxes, or if you think it would be in your county or city's interest to raise taxes, right? Like why is the line drawn there, right? Like if you know if the tax increase would go against your interests, then it's incumbent on you to participate in the process to the extent that you're actually voting in elections if you're allowed to, and that maybe even showing up to these like meetings and everything if you have time. If the basically, I think the process for changing tax rates on the various kinds of like sales taxes and property taxes, and like whatever else you want to count as taxes, right? I don't think it has to go through the same process, but like car tag fees or whatever, right? I think if it's a local tax, then the process for changing that tax rate should be whatever that county or city thinks is appropriate. You know what I mean, Adam?
Yeah, yeah. I think in other words, localizing it. In other words, you want to localize it even further to
Yeah.
so someone from Sylacauga isn't voting on someone from Florence's tax rate or something like that.
Well, not only that, right? But I don't like we don't live in a direct democracy. We live in a representative democracy, right? Constitutional republic, as they would say. So I don't know why I don't think the Alabama Constitution or the Alabama legislature should be prohibiting towns from, right, if they just want to raise taxes without putting it to a vote of the people on the ballot. And let's remember that elections cost money to begin with, right? When you have a ballot initiative, especially if it just stands alone, instead of just coinciding it with or whatever is coming up, right? If you have a ballot initiative on its own, it costs money to do that ballot initiative. We're there.
Yes,
Adam?
I'm still here. Are you still there?
Adam.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You disappeared for a second. You weren't responding.
Yeah, yeah, you dipped out on my end too. I was just making sure. They're still seeing both of us in the broadcast. On your screen right now too is a sample ballot for the upcoming Democratic primary. I'm gonna transition it to just us and pull up a Republican sample too. To see what we are looking at in terms of Jacob. It seems you have muted yourself. It doesn't seem like something I can control from my end.
I have. What's up?
Okay, I was just making sure you know.
Yeah, I just don't think it's helpful
So
to have
right now,
the mic on when I'm not talking.
Oh yeah. So right now, let's actually head back to this. We have two proposed amendments on the Democratic primary. It is proposing an amendment to the Constitution of Alabama of 2022 to provide that the following offenses for which shall a judge may deny bail: shooting or discharging a firearm into an occupied dwelling or other occupied space in violation of Section 13A 1161B Code of Alabama, or any solicitation, attempt, or conspiracy to commit murder. I I don't know about you, Jacob, but I don't see much of a reason to propose this one.
Yeah,
To oppose this one,
I
sorry.
agree. I agree, but I'd love to hear you elaborate on your reasoning.
It seems like, so to my interpretation, what we're looking at is it's redefining limits by which a judge may deny bail, and it's including shooting a firearm into an occupied space. So if you wanted to head up to little Timmy's house, bust out the Glock, and just fire away, a judge may be able to deny you bail for that now. And that, honestly, I, in this circumstance, they, uh, the, it's a rare Alabama legislature W.
Okay, so you're saying okay, no, you're actually saying you're for it. Okay, now I understand.
Yes,
Um,
I'm for I'm for the I'm for the amendment.
oh, okay, yeah. No, okay, I respect that. So especially based on intuition, right? I understand where you're coming from. I understand how like victims families of victims of crime and survivors of violent crime, and especially women who may have not been victims of anything even close to that, right? Or come even close to that, might just be concerned about the fact that you know it, there's a possibility that someone can be accused of something that heinous and still possibly get bail. Now, I oppose this amendment. I oppose the previous amendments or amendment that ultimately prevailed and had a lot of diverse support behind it. And my reasoning is because of the context of where we are in Alabama with regard to bail, with regard to prison, with regard to police accountability. I think you have to understand in most cases, probably the main barrier for people who end up in jail in Alabama, or really probably anywhere in America, right, is probably not a judicial discretion, or a lack of judicial discretion. It's probably more money, right? We haven't even about this debate about cash bail, right, Adam?
Isn't it pretty much just literal like? Isn't it just absolutely literal like bail with cash?
Well, yes. Like some jurisdictions, like Washington D.C., before this became a hot topic, after Black Lives Matter 2020, um, and before it became a right wing, and mainstream media scapegoat for that matter, right, had already stopped doing cash bail. And apparently, it didn't do anything to the crime rate or to the rate of people skipping bail, right? So they just said, right, if you might get pretrial release, because that's the purpose of bail, right, is leverage to make sure that people show back up to court when they're given pretrial release. You might get pretrial release, you might not, but it's not going to be dependent on you being able to put down money for it. And Alabama has not taken on that reform. I don't know when they will, but they should, right? I think the first thing to consider is that the main impediment to a lot of people, no matter what the degree of the crime, no matter what their history is before, no matter what kind of flight risk they are or threat to the community is, it's not going to be that the judge, what decision the judge might make as far as whether to grant them pretrial release. It's whether they can foot the bill, right? And so then, if we start talking about if we make reforms, right, to where people don't necessarily have to pay cash bail before pretrial release, then I'm more inclined to support talking about what are more circumstances in which we can just straight up deny them pretrial release, right? Remember that pretrial release or bail is for people who have not been convicted of that particular crime for which they have been arrested, right? And so this, whether they're guilty or not, it's a disadvantage to them in court, It gives prosecutors more leverage because they can be like, hey, just plead guilty and maybe you'll get out of both jail and prison a little bit longer. Maybe I'll even give you time served and you won't have to spend a day in prison, right? This was there are cases where this has happened that John Oliver talked about, where someone was arrested for a crime and they maintained their innocence till this day. And they've said, the reason I pled guilty is because the prosecutor said they would just give me time served, right? But I absolutely didn't do it. So I think, and on top of that, right, it's not just a problem with jails or with pretrial release or cash bail. It's also a problem with our prisons. And all of these things are connected. And so I cannot, I think that I understand how people feel about this. I understand how, it can be framed as simply an issue of judicial discretion. And there's some contexts in which I can support expanding the judicial discretion. But I cannot in good conscience support it right now. And I think that I will lose on this issue once again. But I think that just like with the crime bills that created new mandatory minimums, just like the drug bills that enhanced sentencing for nonviolent drug crimes, just like broken windows policing, which was supposedly about cleaning up New York and preventing serious crimes by going after everyone, or especially the people who are typically arrested or typically subject to searches for, nonviolent or minor crimes, right? Just like how history has proven the opponents of all of those things right. I think that history will eventually prove me right on this. And
I understand.
That's simply my position.
I understand. So basically, you feel like since bail is temporary release to return to trial, we don't want to assume anything about anyone yet. And by doing this, by releasing them before we get the trial, we're jumping the gun. In other words, or denying them release.
Right, by denying them release or allowing judges to deny them release. And remember that judicial discretion can go a lot of different ways, right? Judicial discretion is great, I think, if you're talking about something that can give people more leniency. Because remember, the point of a lot of the U.S. Constitution and the point of the point of a lot of things that we have in place to protect people's freedom is about the presumption of innocence and the presumption and siding with liberty more than we side with the need for order, right? There are some sacrifices of liberty that we need to make to have a society and to keep everyone safe, but there are also sacrifices towards order and towards the possibility of getting all of the right people locked up that we need to make in order for people's freedom and people's rights. And that includes, thinking about the fact that when you allow more judicial discretion in the area of how harsh judges can be and how much they can deny people pretrial release, when they can lock people up, right? You open the door to, whether they realize it or not, judges acting on hidden racial prejudice, right? Acting on classism, acting on other kinds of biases that shouldn't play into these decisions, but we know they do. And we don't, in some cases, we don't even know what to do about it. I mean, it's been proven that they do this, right? With sentencing and whatnot. And so again, right, I can compromise on this if we make the right reforms in the other direction of saying, hey, if you don't have the money to pay per bail, we're not necessarily going to make your pretrial release depending on that. If we set up independent commissions to hold sheriffs accountable and to hold jails that include and hold police departments that include city correctional officers in city jails accountable, right? If we reform our prison system, which is connected to the jail system, if we make all of these reforms, then I'm willing to talk about more judicial discretion for denying people a pretrial release. But until then, I stand on the position of saying, you know, we need to consider what we're doing here. And
I understand that.
I will vote against that amendment.
Oh, I understand that. We want to make sure we reform what we have and address things like race-based sentencing, which I'm about to pull up a resource for that on your screen, before we give the judicial branch of Alabama, who has had a reputation for race-based sentencing, not just here but across the country. We want to make sure we reform the abilities that they have, reform what we already have before we give them more.
Yeah, so the other amendment, I don't know if you took a look at it, is much less interesting, but do you have any thoughts on it?
Let's take a look. So, proposing an amendment to the Constitution of Alabama of 2022, they all say that, to provide that the compensation of a district attorney may not be diminished during his or her time in office. Why is this even an issue? Of course, we don't.
That's a good question.
Like, of course, unless they have like a proven reason, like a proven track record of being terrible, then we maybe consider it. But even then, district attorneys are already
But even then, right? It's a matter of, you don't decrease their pay. You vote them out in the next election, or if they've broken like the law, or if they've broken like bar association ethics, then you can like remove them before their term has ended. But yeah, there's no reason to decrease their pay. But it's a good question of like, why are we proposing this? And that's my main question. I looked up articles about this proposed amendment. I didn't find any example of where the legislature or the governor has decreased the pay of a DA in the middle of the term. On the other hand, it's not the worst idea, right? I get where they're coming from. You know, the lawmakers who proposed this and maybe the people who are for it, right? Because there's actually a very similar amendment in the U.S. Constitution. Do you know what I'm talking about, Adam?
Yes, I think. Sorry, I'm reading and talking. While we're discussing this, I'm looking up any.
Interestingly, I think it's actually the last
Alabama ballot measures.
Yeah, interestingly, I think it's actually the last U.S. amendment we passed, but it was definitely a very late amendment that was originally supposed to be. It was debated. They put it, putting it in the original Constitution way back in the day in 1787, 1789. And then I think what happened was, and this is a really good story. This was a story about one of the amendments, right? Was that there was someone in school and they were doing a paper. And they said, this would be a great amendment for us to pass, or this is how we could get this amendment passed. And then the teacher gave them a bad grade or a unsatisfactory grade because they said, this would never pass. They'd never get this amendment through these days. So then he went to Congress, right? He went through the process of getting Congress and or the states to pass the amendment. The states were probably involved, and so now we have an amendment in the Constitution that says that you cannot change Congress's salary in the middle of a term. And then the best part of the story is that instructor who initially gave this guy the bad grade changed his grade because he proved him wrong.
Proved him wrong after the fact. That is so. Just to make sure I followed the ballot, the amendment was generally speaking that you. Sorry, one of my cats is off screen wanting attention. So the amendment was generally that you cannot. It was generally that you can't change a congressman's salary in the middle of their term, or
I believe so. I think it's the 27th Amendment. I think it's actually the last amendment. Look up the 27th
All right.
Amendment if you can.
I'll take a look. I'll look it up. Put it on the screen. Just a sec. Oh god, Nutter Butter just posted a TikTok. To you too, buddy. Okay, so that looks like that is exactly what it is. The 27th Amendment, no law varying the compensation for the services of senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened.
Yep. So this is.
Let's
So
look at
this
27th
law
Amendment
is-
explained.
Yeah. So this law is not that unreasonable in the, or this proposed Alabama amendment is not that unreasonable. When you consider that there's precedent for the language in the last amendment we passed to the U.S. Constitution, right? And DAs are elected officials, and like you mentioned, there's no real reason that you would decrease a salary in the middle of the term, especially when, I mean, I'm not huge fans, right? I'm generally right, like I understand they're necessary, but I'm not a huge. When I watch, shows that are about lawyers, I don't root for the DA. I root for the guy who's under the cop's thumb, right? That's just my bias. But I will admit, right, me and my dad were talking about this, and we looked up like the average DA salary in Alabama. It was like 90 to 100,000. That's not a whole lot for a lawyer, especially a lawyer who's an elected official running an entire department, and a very important one at that. But it's considering that this hasn't happened yet. It just seems like a amendment that's being proposed for no reason, and so we should it should just be left to the legislature. We don't need to put more stuff in the state constitution just because. And so I will also be voting no on this. Who knows what will happen? A lot of people tend to be very uneducated on this stuff, and they think that the way things work is like any time that you allow the government to spend more money, then that their taxes automatically go up. So it's like a common thing I've heard is that people will vote no on a lot of amendments just because they think it will raise their taxes, even if it isn't. So let's kind of hope. I mean, it wouldn't be a big deal, but let's kind of hope that the anti-tax instinct kills this, if nothing else, because there might be some people who are like, but if they have to pay DAs more, or if they can't decrease the DA salary, am I going to have to pay more taxes for it? It's dumb thinking, but it gets them to the right conclusion. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's one of those times where Thag has a leg up over Ugg.
Yeah, but generally, right, for all of the reasons that I've laid out, right, and some that I think he could tell me more about, I'm with Doug Jones on this one. Doug Jones said on a live stream, right, based comrade Doug Jones, if I could just take the Alabama Constitution and burn the damn thing, I would, and that's a fire that would last a long time. And I don't know if we're going to get a new convention in the next 4 to 8 years, but we absolutely should. And then I think to avoid this crap from starting again, we need to make it harder to amend the Constitution. Just like with the U.S. Constitution, there could be multiple paths, but they have to be relatively hard. For instance, instead of 60% in both houses and no possibility of gubernatorial veto, you could have 60% in the House, the state House, but because it's supposed to be more powerful and it's a smaller body, you have to get 90% in the Senate, then you have to get a governor's signature. Then it goes to the people to vote on. You know what I'm saying? Just more barriers within the legislative process before you even put it to a vote of the people. Another path could involve, modeled after the way that in the most common paths to getting or I think every path to amend the U.S. Constitution actually involves the states on some level. But the way the states are involved in amending the U.S. Constitution, right? For a proposed amendment, you have to go to each state basically and see if you can get a certain number of states to approve it on their own before you can. And then you also have to get congressional approval, right? There could be an equivalent where a certain number of counties, right? Whether you're talking about like a unanimous vote of the county commission or you're talking about a county-wide vote, have to approve it before you get an amendment, right? Or we could have an independent commission that vets certain amendments before they go to the legislature or the people. And you could say that you can only put one amendment on each ballot, right? So for instance, if all you have in statewide in a year is a primary election and a general election, then you could basically only propose 2 amendments that year. So these are different
That
ideas.
makes sense.
Yeah, these are different ideas where like there could be multiple paths, but in a future constitution, I think it would be better if it was a little bit harder to pass amendments. Any thoughts on that, Adam?
Honestly, yeah, because one of the things that I noticed in passing federal bills or passing bills like in the U.S. Senate is the fact that they sometimes will try to just ram things through with minimal input from the other side. They will just try to like jam things through Congress or jam things through the House, and I'm just like, what? How is this? How? This should not happen anywhere, much less in Alabama.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But like, it's also based on my idea that the same way, like, so the thing about like Southern right-wingers who are typically Republican these days, if they're really out on a ledge and really feel strongly about what they say, they might actually be in like not voting or be part of like the Constitution Party or the Libertarian Party. But anyway, right, Southern right-wingers, especially in the Republican establishment, like states' rights, but they do not like home rule. Do you see the contradiction there, Adam?
Honestly,
you know what I
I'd
mean
have
by
to
home
look
rule,
up.
right? They like the idea of states being able to do whatever they want to, at least rhetorically, right? But they also like keeping cities and counties within their states from being able to do what they want to do. So they believe in decentralization of power in rhetoric when it helps their cause, but they don't when it doesn't help their cause, or it gives like cities and counties in their state more power that they don't like. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so they like home rule, but they
They like states' rights.
rights.
They don't like city and county rights. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that they like the rights to have a centralized state when it benefits this opinion when it benefits me, but when it doesn't, I've always been against it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also especially these days connected to like racism and anti-progressivism. You know, uh, 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 but in a future constitution, right? I want there to be more home rule, more rights for counties and cities baked into it automatically. Look, the Vestavia Hills. There's a whole bunch of dumb crap that you're gonna Mountain Brook, right? Name your like county of like name your like city of like 100 people, and 65 of them are boomers of one particular race, right? All those cities are going to be able to make a whole bunch of dumb decisions that I'm not necessarily going to agree with, If I don't live there, I don't have to agree with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if you don't live there, it's not your
Even if
problem.
I'm in the minority, yeah, even if I do live there for some reason and I'm in the minority, I can more easily just move out of that place. But like, the thing is right. Like, there's a whole bunch of like stuff that I would disagree with. That I still think that we would be better off with it being granted that cities and counties have the right to make those decisions. This includes, for instance, right, when I saw that they were passing a bill to change the way that you could fire library board members. Ultimately, it came down to I'm not going to die on this hill at the very least, because it seems that this is just giving like cities the power to appoint and fire their library boards as they feel appropriate. You see what I'm saying? So there might be some like town of
Yeah,
like 200 people that's all super fundamentalist people who go to the same church and watch all the same fake news, and then they decide to remove the president of their library board because in their tiny little underfunded library they found like one book that they didn't like, and that's not any of my
yeah,
business.
that was what I was worried about because with it being different, with it being a different process and how to fire a library board or a member, yeah, especially nowadays, I was definitely worried about that. They'd be like, "This book promotes being one of them gays. This book promotes DEI wokeness."
Yeah. But the U.S. Constitution, right? Point being, right, to circle it back, right? The U.S. Constitution has baked into it the amendment process involves the states by default, right? The state legislatures or a vote of the people of the particular states, because it was the understanding when it started, especially, but it's still the understanding, right, that there is a level of decentralization of power, a level of sovereignty, right, that the two branches of, the two levels of government mirror each other on, right, that states have to make their own decisions and to hold the federal government accountable, right? Like even today, right? Like we have two U.S. senators per state, regardless of population, because it's an understanding, right, that each state is a community of interest, right? Regardless of the population of that state, right? It's not about whether you're in the majority nationwide. It's whether you are part of a community that you want to send two people to represent you. Whereas, like the U.S. House of Representatives, they are there to, they're apportioned and set up in a way to more so represent the will of the national populace. Yet still, each district for the delegation, right, is going to remain within a particular state. You see what I'm saying? So, like, in a future constitution, I don't think it would be, if it's your goal to have more rights for cities and counties than we have today, I don't think it would be too radical or too ridiculous to have counties be part of an amendment process. Does that make sense?
Yes, it. I honestly feel the same way. Having counties be part of amendment processes, that honestly, I'm more surprised we don't do that at this point. Like that is like why do we do this by why do we do this by district and not like what? Huh?
Yeah. So even with like some of the statewide things, like the Public Service Commission, right? Some of the ways that they ultimately passed a bill reforming the Public Service Commission in all the wrong ways, because the long term would be decentralization of power, of like not just having statewide representatives on the Public Service Commission, but you know, having like particular districts where particular like regions, I think based on, or at least the numbers based on the number of congressional districts, which is, you know what our number of congressional districts is, right, Adam?
Isn't it 5,204?
The number of congressional districts we have in Alabama. I can't tell whether you're messing with me or not.
I thought it was 5,204. I want to say
Okay,
7.
what number comes after 6?
12.
7. We have 7 congressional districts, and so the idea that had been proposed by like people like Robin Lineker, a Republican activist and politician from Homewood, was that we would have, just like the school board, we would have 7 different districts representing us in the Public Service Commission. Long term, that's supposed to be the effect, right? But short term, right, what this change to the Public Service Commission is going to do is more decentralization. I mean, more centralization of power in terms of the governor immediately getting to appoint these seats.
Seems like the party of
a Republican,
government.
An 88 or 81-year-old outgoing, business interest Republican governor. Way to go, guys! So I hope there's payout.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like the party of small government ain't so small.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is also a difference between like business Republicans and establishment Republicans and populists who are actually kind of consistent about that or actually believe in things. Like, I think, like, you know how they're trying to do this closed primary thing? I saw that there's an ale.com poll that shows that the more MAGA you are and the more conservative you are, the more actually opposed you are to closing primaries, right? Because these are, like, think about it, like, these are people who, like, if they see any appeal to Trump beyond to the like very specific bigotries and everything, they think that he's like an independent thinker and he says what he means and blah, and he speaks for the people and blah blah blah. Why would they have any interest in just like closing off the party to people who think for themselves and aren't just like official like Republican water carriers? You know what I mean? Because that's how Trump came up in 2016, was by distinguishing himself from the conservative and Republican water carriers, right? He's like, Marco Rubio,
By the way,
you're little Marco. George Bush, you're a liar. You got us into Iraq for no reason. You know what I mean?
yeah, by the way, on your screen is just a daily reminder. This is your governor. This fucking crypt keeper is your governor.
Like, and also to be fair, I don't think she should be governor at this age and at this point for her sake too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because she sounds like she sounds like something copy pasted right out of the civil rights era. She's too old.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, right? There are even people in the legislature. I'm not going to name names, right? But there are Democrats in the legislature who are running for re-election, and I know they've made the right votes on certain committees and stuff. And I'm like, he's 85, but I've got to support him. I don't want him to be replaced with a rural Republican. But it's like, it's also, you got to wonder, right? Was there an option of him stepping aside and vetting someone else to run for the legislature, to run for the Democratic primary? You know what I mean?
No, because then he'd lose money.
Well, I mean, I suppose so. Yeah, you don't really get to raise money for a campaign fund, which you might be able to turn into a personal slush fund for whatever other like personal or political projects you're running. If you're not running yourself, but yeah. I mean, it's just like I just think just like
By the
how
way,
like
since we're
no
talking
one.
about
Go ahead.
sorry, since we're talking about people that are running for things, on your screen is just a quick reminder of voter information for Alabama coming up this year. Every source that you've seen me pull up is going to be in the description of this video. That's why I have like 6,000 tabs open. But on your screen is voter information. It'll be included in the description.
Yeah. Also, reminder: deadline to register to vote is May 4. If you've moved since you last voted, right? If you just turned 18, if you just had your right to vote. I mean, if you went to the trouble of, I'm not going to go down that path. We should end felony disenfranchisement, y'all. You should automatically get your right to vote restored back again when you finish parole. Unless you like committed treason or something, in which case I don't know why you would get parole. But anyway, that's a different. I'm not going to go down that path. Point is, like, if you have a funny feeling in your bones about the clown Secretary of State Wes Allen, who's running for lieutenant governor and trying to out-MAGA the Trump candidate, check your voter registration status, and the deadline for the primaries is May 4. There's no excuse not to register and then go, read up a little bit and make some decisions, especially when this might be, right, if you're unaffiliated or if you're the minority in your district in terms of voting preference, this might be your last chance to vote in a primary. I hope they didn't get that passed today, or that they won't get that passed, but who knows? It might be so important that they try to do a like special session. Point is, check your voter registration, people, and go vote. Like, it's really like the worst that's going to happen is that you wait like 5 to 10 minutes at least, to fill out a piece of paper and then feel like you need to take a shower afterwards. If you really, really can't get yourself to vote for any politicians for some reason, even though I think there's usually a good case to be made, there's a lesser evil, just vote on the amendments, because it's a simple yes or no, right? Do you agree with that sentiment, Adam? Do you kind of co-sign?
Yes, it's not that hard to register. I'm putting up information on the screen too about the voter registration deadline.
Right. It should be easier. We should also have automatic voter registration that you can go and opt out of, but that's a different subject. Hopefully we'll be able to get an interview before November with with Mr. Rogers, the jolly Alabama Secretary of State candidate, and we can talk to him about all of the ways it should be easier or even automatic, voter registration. But as it stands, remember the deadline to register to vote for the May 19 primaries, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or someone who just identifies as neither and votes in primaries, because they're basically elections, right? The deadline to register is May 4, and then the primary is on May 19. Do you have anything else you want to add, Adam?
Apart from what's about to be on your screen, which is the voter deadline, do it or we will find you and delete your Minecraft account.
Yeah, exactly.
No pressure. But do it or we
will
find you.
No pressure. We're just going to bust your kneecaps. In a video game.
In a video game, of course. So to summarize, what we talked about is the Alabama amendments that are up for statewide vote this coming May the 19th, coming to a ballot box near you. I need to make like a bad like 80s movie trailer, but where it's like advertising voting information. We've spoken about all that. We've spoken about our thoughts on the bail system. The First Amendment being opposed is freedom of speech. No, not that one. Is redefining what conditions judges can deny bail on. The second one sounds pretty common sense, but to each their own. Is saying that a district attorney cannot have their pay docked while being in office, essentially.
Which, to be clear, I can't speak for Adam, but my position is vote no because it's an unnecessary addition to the Constitution based on a non-issue, based on something that hasn't actually happened yet.
Oh yeah, I feel the same. Yeah, I feel the same way. If we already do it for congressmen, we already do it for senators and everything, where they can't have their pay docked while they're being in office. I really think it's kind of overkill to do it for DAs too, or unless some smart ass lawmaker was just like, it don't directly say DA.
Yeah, it just.
But anyway,
yeah.
Sorry, you were
This
saying?
has been a critical dispatch.
Thank you for joining us.